With that, I look forward to your questions this evening, but also I look forward to an engaging conversation as well as we embark to tonight's interview for the superintendency for the city of Somerville. So with that, please, your first question.
Great, thank you. The first question is, do you see a steady before-school program for SPS?
And I believe currently, what I've read from the literature, there's an EL program, a before-school EL program. I think before-school programs are beneficial for a number of reasons. One, getting students early engaged into the school atmosphere from a daily perspective, but also providing the supports that they may need, the additional academic supports needed for them to be successful during not only the normal school day, but as a cumulative effect, the entire school year. So they are very effective. Research shows that. And if it's something, again, I know funding is always an important piece of that, but making sure that if it is something that the community and the city really combine to, it's something that would be very beneficial.
As student needs change, we need new programming. Please walk us through a program you've developed from developing a budget, curriculum, and professional development.
From a development perspective, again, having a CTE background, when you develop new programs, we were always looking towards what are the economic trends in that particular industry? Can it be sustained over time from making a reasonable wage? And so really looking at that type of data really influenced our work and really developing 3 new programs at the Madison Park Technical Vocational High School. In particular, they're in our computer programming line, as well as developing a more robust facilities management. Now, I want to say a little bit about the facilities management program. It was an existing program, but when you say the old name was, I believe, building and property maintenance, to me that sounds like handyman. And so when you look at facilities management, it's something where students have to learn more about programming, where everything is now automated in a lot of these buildings, and they need technical people to have these skills. And the shift to a facilities management program was very beneficial for our students. Matter of fact, Northeastern really helped us with that, developing co-op opportunities for our facilities management kids because it was right across the street. But number one, understanding the need that they could fulfill. So really upgrading existing programs to make them fit today's paradigm was one. But from an early education perspective, one of the big initiatives that I was able to initiate in all 3 cities in which I worked was Saturday school. And when you hear the word Saturday school, we think punitive. And our Saturday schools were running for 22 weeks. And you're all for support of students, never punitive. Looking at support systems for MCAS supports, as well as actual credit recovery courses, as well as opening up some of the CTE programs where students are making projects, some preparing for competitions, and really soliciting the funds for that from the district, and which exceeded well over $100,000, because obviously we have to pay teachers for that. But it was something in which we were very fortunate, in which each district would really support those initiatives, saw the value of supporting those initiatives. And we actually added a middle school component where students from local middle schools would come and participate in them as well. So really looking at those pieces that can advance student interest, pique curiosity as well, but really prepare students for opportunities outside the school. It was really relevant for us, and I look forward to doing the same in Somerville in a similar capacity.
Which of your districts that you've worked in do you think may have best prepared you for the complex populations you'll encounter in Somerville? What mistakes do you feel like you've made with complex populations, and what did you learn from them?
I think each 3, they're so unique in each. When you look at, and I call my second home city, which is Springfield, where I lived and resided from 1985 to 2015. You're talking about high poverty area, and a large number of students of color with a lot of white flight out of that city. And when you look at that, you always, well, what's the need? Obviously, what are some of the programs that we're going to need? High EL populations as well. So what are the things that we need to look and put in place? What mechanisms and structures do we have to put in place, not just from an academic and curricular perspective, but also from a social, emotional, and domestic perspective as well. So looking at, and again, it's something that, and I'll answer this as well when it comes up. I know it'll come up again. Why are you picking Somerville? Somerville's mission really involves a holistic approach to child development, the intellectual, social, emotional, as well as the physical potential of students. And so when we look at those realms, it really resonates in me, especially when we talk about our students of color, especially our students who are immigrating from other countries. How are we really integrating them into society? What supports are we providing for them, not only academic, but from a domestic perspective? What programs are really resonating with them? Do we include them in programming? So that's, I think, all three cities, again, were very, very integral in that. And I really can't pick out one because they all have a similar demographic. I think Boston may have more white students than the other two. That would be the only difference.
With many of our school facilities facing challenges and the district not having direct control, what is your experience with school facility planning, the MSBA, construction, et cetera, and how would you approach facility planning with the mayor and city staff?
Would also involve some of our state legislators as well, really to advocate for us. If you're looking at it, again, I had the opportunity to see the Winter Hill School, which is one of the older, I believe one of the older schools here in Somerville, and again, in some need of some repair. But I go back to roughly about 2006, 2007 at Putnam Vocational. Putnam was a building, it was one of those work projects for the WPA from Franklin Delano Roosevelt projects, and we were the last of the wooden door schools. I mean, we literally had wooden doors in which we had to chain shut. Putnam had been on the docket, and people had talked about getting a new school for roughly about 20 to 25 years. And we really had a mayor, a progressive-thinking mayor, as well as some state legislators. It was time. The school was making some improvement. People were excited about going. They saw the rise in enrollment, and we struck while the fire was hot. But again, you had a combination of city council, a mayor, and state legislators all for this. And between the work of it and a supportive community, we made it happen. If you look at that school now, it's probably a $120 million school. It looks phenomenal. And I actually left before it was completed. So, but again, it was just great to see that the culmination of the collaborative work of city government, state government, school department, and the city itself really coming as one. And with some of the schools, why can't that work here? Really leveraging our relationships with our legislators, really leveraging relationships with the MSBA, and really get this on a timeline. And for the schools, when you get things on a timeline and you get it on paper and what it really means to a community, it makes a difference.
Based on what you've learned about the Somerville Public Schools, what do you see as the biggest challenge we face, and how does your experience inform how you would approach that challenge?
Well, one of the, going back to winter, space. You're looking at expanding programming, and especially with the number of students being served from an EL perspective, as well as some of our special education students, space. How do we account for that? And some of these schools are very landlocked. You can't go up, can't get wide. So how do we look at space in a different manner? I know Winter Hill has a unique approach where there's, I believe, a property across the city that they're looking at to work with the city as well. But how do we start to look at space? Because one, you have a system that is really, we have more professionals coming in. You have a changing demographic as well here in Somerville. So that means people are very interested, and that really starts with your schools. Families see that it's a successful school system. They tend to come. You have programs that fit the needs of the family. They tend to come. And as a sidebar, I was looking at the real estate prices here in Somerville, and I thought Boston was bad. But I digress a bit. But I think really looking at space and how do we really redefine space, especially from a K-8 perspective. I think you have just a beautiful edifice next door, which was well needed. I remember visiting Somerville about 5 or 6 years ago in the old building. So much new, but what occurs when we start more students begin to come in? Are we able to expand? But space becomes, especially when it comes to programming for our EL students and special education students, really becomes of a premium.
For the past 3 years, SPS has not had police officers stationed in our schools. Since having SROs in schools is now a district choice, what is your position on police in schools? And are you comfortable leading a district without police in schools?
And I've worked and I go back to my years in Springfield. Springfield was a district that had armed police officers in the schools. And it was get very specific with it. Springfield, they called the unit the Quebec unit. They're a very specialized group of patrolmen who came into schools and were assigned to specific schools. At our school, we made it a point, because we saw some of our students in the past that had some difficulty with the law. But we wanted to make sure that they saw these officers as part of the school and as a support. And it was great when you get police officers who really inoculate themselves from all the negative, but integrate themselves into the schools. And what I mean by that, they're involved in all activities. They came to basketball games. They came to the honor roll assemblies. They were just present, and they were really seemed to be a part of the school, where students would just come up to them and start talking. And I think it was from the overall, in the bigger picture, we wanted the relationship between our students and the Springfield police to be a positive and not seen as a negative. So when they go back to their neighborhoods and when you hear the verbiage that, well, all cops are bad, well, not those that we have at Putnam. They're the guys that help me with my homework. They're guys that are sitting in my classroom helping me with my math. I don't see that. So we wanted to really make it a point that not every police officer is a degenerate. We wanted them to really say that they are a part of our community. Fast forward to Boston. Boston removed them, with the safety officer and such. I think it's how well people feel, with either one. I've gone either way, and it's not to waffle it. I've seen the success of armed service, of an armed police officer with no negative effects. And I want to put the emphasis on that, no negative effects, because they weren't seen as someone who was just setting the law. They were seen as just being a part of the school, who was there to support us going through the day. But when you have students and they're going through metal detectors and you haven't built that culture. At Putnam, we built that culture. And I think when you look at what we hadn't built that culture from a safety perspective, where they were seen as one side as saying, we are the law, as opposed, welcome coming in, I am here to support you. So I will really look at that and really want to hear from the public, hear from the current administration, their feelings on it, and really just make a determination from those conversations so I can get a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives to really make a decision that we all not just live with, that we all accept and that we can move on from.
What is something in education you have changed your mind about?
That's a great question. That is a great question. And there's so many, and believe it or not, I wish you were inside my brain right now. You can see everything swirling around. Which one should I select? But, I think I changed my mind. And I'm going to say it's probably the simplest thing. Is homework and detention. I look at today, and it was a time, and again, I'm posting nostalgic now, where students actually brought things home so the parents could see it. And then there was this paradigm now that, well, they can do everything in school. But I said, well, we take away the component of a parent being engaged and being involved and asking a question about the work, where now the parent gets an understanding about what is going on during the day in the life of their child. And that's been removed at some point in time. Now, obviously, with some schools don't allow students to take books home. And because with the advent of Google Classroom and the such, I think it removes the parents from that one simple premise about really engaging a conversation about education on a consistent and regular basis. And so those are things where I went with it, but now, and I saw it, and what really captured it today was I was in one of the schools, and I think in both schools, Winter Hill as well as East Somerville, students taking notes. Students taking notes. And it's unfortunate that I walk through schools in which students don't take notes. And I'm saying, how do you get recall? How can you refer back? And so those are things, and how do you get that? Through homework. Expectations of coming back and reviewing what you have done, what you have gone over. And so with homework policies, in which I've changed my mind, I think we need to really incorporate some homework requirements going back and forth. So again, students are able to do that. The other that I looked at was open campus. And I don't know if that's an issue here. And I was at a school in which there was, and I guess, it was a response. I said, well, that's kind of cool, giving them responsibility. But then in this rash of, things that have been occurring in certain neighborhoods and the such, I've really had to change my mind about that. And with open campus, I know some students are very responsible, but I think having students more or less where we can see them and contain them and the such. I believe Cambridge still does open campus. And we did it to an extent with seniors in Springfield, and at some point I was okay with it, but then at Madison Park we just went right back and said no, we're going to close the campus, obviously because from an accountability perspective, but also from a safety perspective.
What experience do you have in improving transparency and communication?
Being very transparent with my communication, just being very present, very visible, having forums like it's not so formal here at City Hall, but I am big with town meetings, and we go to a particular neighborhood, and well, how are folks feeling today? Talk to me about some of the concerns, and really sharing the vision and the mission of Somerville and what we're doing, and having people have those conversations, making sure that we are very active in promoting the Somerville Public Schools across many mediums, not just through obviously the print media, but also through social media about what we're doing. So many times we coalesce together when something negative occurs, when something happens at a particular school, and obviously it draws the ire of folks and people get excited about it, and rightfully so, but we don't accentuate the things that we're doing on a consistent, a regular basis, day in and day out, and weekly, some of the great things that our students and our teachers and administrators are doing. We don't get that information out. So really promoting it across a number of mediums, but also face-to-face. I love coming out, and as you can see, I love to talk, but I really like hearing, I like really feeling the energy from folks so then they can really get a sense of what's in my heart and what's on my mind and really get it out, but also hearing and listening and getting different perspectives so that we are all on the same page to really support the efforts of our educational staff, but really to do that in order to really prepare our students for every single opportunity that is presented to them after they've gone through a pre-K-12 and received that diploma going across the stage at Somerville High School.
What is an educational practice intervention that you believe to be ineffective, and why?
Long-term suspension. I think, again, it's on the books. It's on the books. But I think there needs to be, obviously, if certain situations come about, I believe in progressive discipline. I also believe in suspension as well, to be, very, very transparent. I believe in suspension, but as a deterrent to future behaviors. But the question becomes, when someone gets on a long term, what do? They shouldn't be at certain, depending on the district, students are just sitting at home. And I said, do we have a mechanism in place? Most places do. I know Boston, they won't be at home, but in most places, they are done. And so what are these mechanisms that we can put in place, regardless if it's from a legal perspective? What can we do? Because they are still part of our community. These students are still part of our community, and one, they are still teenagers. And are we setting the tone for an individual for failure for a mistake that they made at age 15? And so what are those rehabilitative processes that we can put in place? How can we partner if this is the judicial system, how do we partner with them to get our students, because regardless if they're not at Somerville High School, they are a citizen of the Somerville city community. And so how do we really not give up on individuals? And how do we play a part as the Somerville Public Schools? How do we play a part in looking at resources, opportunities, and as such to really aid in the rehabilitation of a student?
I'll ask this one next because it's related. What are your views on discipline, especially suspension for kids of color and students with IEPs?
I believe in progressive discipline, and it's something where you don't suspend me for throwing a piece of paper, or you just don't want me in class. I believe with steps towards suspension. Suspension should always be the last resort of any type of progressive discipline model. And when you have these models, again, I know when I go back to my years in Springfield, even at Madison Park, suspendable, we had the non-negotiables. The non-negotiables was any type of violence. Fights and as such, we just could not tolerate violence. So that was a suspendable offense. Blatant disrespect towards adult and authority was a suspendable offense, as well as any type of weapons and drug paraphernalia to that extent. Outside of that, all the behaviors we can deal with. And you utilize verbal reprimands, parent contact, parent meetings, possible detention. You work a loss of privileges, of going on field trips and as such. That progressive discipline model works. So I believe in it. I believe in that model. And again, if you have to get to a suspendable model, the educators have done their due diligence, and really to meet the criteria to remove a student. And again, not for an extensive period of time, but for a number of times that it has an effect. Because one of the things with suspension is that if you have a student who is disrupting the learning at no cost, the other 25 are suffering as well because the teacher's attention is there. So hopefully that progressive model gets there, and if you have to remove, it becomes a deterrent for other students as well.
How do you see restorative justice playing into that?
Oh, absolutely. There's always should be, whenever we have a removal of school, what does that intake look like at that school? When a student comes back from an offense, what is the mechanisms that schools have put in place? What are the meetings and what are the criteria that they're really setting forth? And not hardcore, but as the intake, what are the resources that you're going to have for that individual student? Is a counselor going to be involved? Do we have a behavior plan in effect? Do we have the parents' agreement with these situations, making sure that we are availing all the opportunities for this student to come back to school without any baggage to say that, you cannot turn this around. Because so many times student does something, they come back, there's no intake. We always want people to realize what they have done doesn't just have an effect on them, but it has an effect on the entire class, especially if it's a consistent disruption of the educational process. So intakes are very, very important and very vital and need to be very consistent.
How have you seen leadership go wrong, and what would you look at to understand if a leader is being effective?
Leadership goes wrong when it's unilateral. And what I mean by when you make decisions without seeing other perspectives. And that goes to, and you may hear it tonight if it comes up, I believe in distributive leadership. I believe that we pay people to do a particular duty or a particular responsibility. And for me to make a decision, and I'll use the example of special ed, I am not a special education expert. I know enough about special ed, but that's why we have a special ed director here. What are the perspectives that we're looking at? And so when we make these decisions that are very much done in a vacuum and unilateral, it usually blows up in your face. When you don't listen to the community on things that are going on and you go under your own understanding as opposed to the understanding that folks who have been here before you. So really understanding the fact that you make decisions, but you make decisions that are very informed. And the only way you can be informed are by the people who are on the ground doing the work.
Currently, Somerville has a strong city council, a weak mayor, and strong teachers union. What has been your experience working with these types of electeds, and how do you turn them into allies willing to go to bat for the school district's priorities?
Well, we work with all constituencies. You know, again, I don't know of the status of each one, but I know that each one of those entities is a vital piece of the education of our students and also for our families. And I think really understanding that we are in a working relationship with the mayor, with the city council, and the school committee, as well as the superintendent. We are the four legs of a chair, and we need to be balanced in order for everything to stay stable and move forward. The moment that we are making things personal in nature about someone's ability to do things, I think it really takes away from the power and the strength that we have as opposed to being a unified force to really provide the best possible resources that we can for education. When we have those delineations of strength and weaknesses amongst the entities, I think when those are played out in the public, it's to the detriment of public education. So I see it as working in collaboration. The superintendent, as you know, again, if it comes to fruition, myself, the mayor, school committee, and city council all being on the same page and always having our North Star, and that North Star is always in the best interest of our students, to prepare to give them the best possible resources, the best possible teaching and learning opportunities, the best possible programming, so they are duly prepared for every opportunity as they walk through the strata of public education through high school. So yeah, regardless of who the mayor is and who the city council members are and school committee, we are one. We should work to form a coalition to really be the best informed individuals and most unified individuals to make those decisions to really move Somerville forward from an educational perspective.
How would you approach inclusion for special education and aligning with IDEA? What is your interpretation of IDEA in the context of providing service in the general education classroom?
I'm a firm believer in inclusion, and I go back, and if I can digress a bit, I go back to 2002. Well, I go back to 1988, which is my first year of teaching in the Springfield Public Schools, coming from private industry, and I happened to have a resource from a self-contained room next to my math room, and the special education teacher, she must have been about 14 at the time, 14 or 15 years in. I think I was a month and a half in. And she asked, do you mind if one of my students take one of your math courses? And unfortunately, we use that unthinkable approach called tracking back in those days. I said, well, let's really, I said, I don't know if he wants to do math. And it had one of those revolving doors between us, so the student just walked through and sat down, and before you know it, we started inclusion. One of the first inclusion models that we have. It started from one, then it was two, the next thing you know, there were 5 students in the classroom. And as we noticed, the more that they were acclimating themselves to the culture of my classes, we started to see more engagement from them from a total school perspective. And the conversations between me and the teacher were all very casual at first because it was an experimental thing. Now it became, how do we plan these things? So I go back to 1988 to 2002, my first year at the William N. DeBerry Elementary School in Springfield, my first principalship. And the teachers came up with an idea. Would you mind us attempting to have a co-teach model between our EL students and our general ed students in the 3rd grade? Try it. It was a success. It was a massive success. And I say all that, I believe in inclusion. I believe that it enriches both the general ed and the students that are involved, either that they be EL or special education. There must be intentional conversation, and more than conversation, planning with those teachers that are involved, and whatever is needed to make those things happen, let's make them happen, because both benefit and even our staff members benefit from it. But most importantly, I go back to families. When that child comes home with that gleeful look on their face about what they've learned and that they've been included and they feel that they belong in school, it's priceless. And that's what we look to build, and that's something that we would look to build here in Somerville.
Excuse me. A parent comes to you with a complaint about an urgent issue of student safety at one of the K-8 schools. What is your approach to address the issue and get back to the parent?
hopefully give me some time to really discuss the issue with the school, with the leader of the school, the principal of the school and their team, what has transpired and what are our next steps, but making sure that we stay in close contact with the parents going forward, especially if it's safety. And if that's calling someone at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, so be it, because we want to make sure that parents are assured that, one, we are taking care of the matter and that we are handling the matter, but most importantly, that we have a turnaround, not for the sake of a quick turnaround, for the sake of just expediency, but we're doing it, that we are doing it to the point where we have facts and we can relay factual information, as opposed to sometimes we got caught up in a couple of things here in Boston where we didn't have all the facts, but we turn around and give, well, this is what we're doing. And again, we actually had more information after the fact. But let's be very prudent with getting information to parents and move forward from there. But really giving the opportunity for the school to really say, this is what happened and this is what we have done thus far. And I think having the parents coalesce around that as well. So again, having just communication, lines of communication being very open, very transparent, and very just truthful discourse about issues, and I think we'll all be fine.
How can the Somerville Public Schools support and include LGBTQIA+ students, teachers, and staff? What experiences from previous roles would you bring to the position as superintendent in Somerville?
Inclusivity. I mean, as a high school principal, I mean, it's mandated. It's a mandate, and it's no question about it. And similar to other students, sometimes depending on where you are, safety of our LGBTQ community is crucial. But one of the things we want to do, similar to other students, making sure that they feel welcome, making sure they feel that they belong, and making sure that they have every opportunity and right to receive an education duly reserved for them. And so again, equity, giving them what they need to be successful, making sure that we have support mechanisms in place from counselors to whatever we may need, but even having voice about how they're educated, how they feel going to school, and having a forum to discuss those things are very important. And that should not just avail to LGBTQ students, but all students of color, our immigrant students as well. So making sure that their voices are heard, making sure their families' voices are heard, and making sure we provide those forums where they can really feel like a release is coming to them.
How will you tackle implicit bias within the schools between teachers and administration?
Work. Just really working that. That, you know, when you're dealing with human nature and implicit bias, it's one thing to tell someone that they're implicit, someone to really have that quote-unquote come to Jesus moment that they are, but having real dialogue with folks about it. And you have two options. You can accept it or you can refute it. And I think when we have it and it's known and it's stated out there, it's a matter of getting all of us in a growth mindset, that sometimes we have these biases, but we can grow from them. When we talk about students, about mistakes that they made, they become teachable moments. Well, as adults, why can't we have a teachable moment? And so when we have these things, let's bring this out and have that discourse, that true discourse about things, and really put ourselves in the position where people are now making this, wow, I do have a blind spot. And at my advanced age, there may be blind spots that each day that may get exposed by me. It's a matter of me being a person who has a growth mindset. Say, wow, I did not think of that. How do I get better? And that should be our mindset anyway as a community. How do we get better each and every day from a humanity perspective? So really having just really some dialogue and really understand that. Now if it gets too deep and it's so prevalent, then we have to have more of a conversation, a deeper dive into it.
That is the end of our submitted questions. If anyone has anything else, let me know. Is there anything you want to add, Kevin? It was a laundry list of questions there.
They were fantastic. Yeah, I definitely want to hear folks' voice because, like I said, I can talk. And I don't want to sit here, actually got a pulpit and everything here, so I don't want to make it church either. But I really want to, hear folks, how do folks feel about Somerville in the public schools? Yes, sir.
You know what, will you come up and just speak into this? It's just so that the people who are watching at home can hear, 'cause otherwise
Thank you. Can you hear me on TV?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Liron Vitone. I'm the president of the PTA Council here in Somerville, and I've had the great privilege of working with PTA leaders across the city. Every year we have a meeting with the school committee and mayor to let them know what our thoughts and priorities are as budget season rolls around. Oftentimes we see great partnership, and sometimes, the things we're asking for don't make sense at the time, and we recognize that. How do you approach your work with parent groups and teacher groups in collaboration, and how open will you be in sharing information even before decisions are made, so that families and teachers sort of know what to expect?
Thank you for the question. Open discourse, I see Rami's here. Again, Rami, good to see you. I think we had this brief conversation regarding that. I think open disclosure about what is needed and what people are looking for. And I'll take families, for example. I think really having, and when we say it, how true is it, but I believe in an open door policy. I know as a superintendent it's a little bit different, but I believe in people having the ability to come in and let's talk. I believe in town. I think I heard from Michigan. I love town meetings. And so with families, I really want to know how families are engaged. If it's from a budget perspective, if it's from a safety perspective, if it's from a staffing perspective, well, let's talk about it. Because you always get the stance from the school committee and the superintendent. This is what we've agreed. This is what we are talking about. How do you feel about that? Because I think the biggest thing is getting consensus and not trying to leverage parents or leverage the teachers union to do what we want, but that they see what we're trying to accomplish, that we're doing things in the best interests of children and families in the city of Somerville. And really making sure that you feel it as a parent, you feel it as a teacher, you feel it as an administrator, that you feel confident that the decisions that are made are in the best interests of students, families in the city of Somerville. And that only happens with forums such as this, even more intimate forums at smaller venues, but whatever needs to happen to make sure that you understand that parents are understanding that we are working towards being the best possible school district we can possibly be. If that's a teachers forum and the such, whatever needs to happen, let's have it. And I think communication, as simplistic as it sounds, that is the key to success in everything we do, from any type of relationship, from a marriage to a superintendent and school committee, to a superintendent to families, to a superintendent to principals, to a principal to teachers. Communication is vital. And if it's not successful, everything breaks down. You're welcome. I think we have a gentleman here.
Thank you. I want to share my perspective, not assuming that it's the same as anybody else's. I feel like there's some truly wonderful things happening in our schools. Some powerfully driven, deeply purposeful teachers who really connect to students in incredible ways. I also think sometimes the inequities in our system there's a gap between the story we as a progressive city like to tell about ourselves and the realities of what happens when we kind of pass the buck on and who that falls on. And I just want to give one example. One of my children had an elementary school teacher who may have been going through some difficulties in her life at the time. The principal of the school informed me that she was absent 33 times in a school year without giving an explanation. She ended up leaving that school and going to another of our public schools, one with a generally lower socioeconomic status population. And I think that's just one of many examples, I think, of how there is a shuffling and a shifting of priorities and who gets attention. And I think sometimes we don't want to have conversations about tricky things like, is there a teacher who's not doing a good job by their students? But when we don't have that conversation, I think who that falls on, it's very unequal.
Okay, thank you. And, obviously, those fall within the realm of the evaluation process in which principals evaluate teachers as well. I think that's a conversation that we have also with do you call it human resources here? Because, it's like 12 different acronyms and names for human resources. But really have the conversation with the directors of human resources about these are some of the situations that have come about. What's the feeling, but making sure principals are there as well in a particular instance, as you indicated. But we really want to really solve those things through the evaluation process.
Why don't we end this formal process, and I'll let you come down from your podium, and if anyone wants to chat before you take you to dinner. Thank you all for coming, and I also just want to mention that there's a form on the SPS website that you are welcome to fill out in this process if you have opinions about the candidates that you've met at any time this week. You can do that as a way. You can also reach out to any school committee member, but just so you guys know that is on the SPS website. And thank you all.
Folks, thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.